When my tears turn to laughter, that child long ago, my soul starts to linger. It's home, I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me alone to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam.
Soldiers who came here with Wolseley in 1870, crews who worked the Border Commission, men of the newly formed Northwest Mounted Police. They all spread glorious stories of timber for housing, of rich prairie soil ready for the plow. They told of wildfowl and game, of fish in the lakes and rivers. And they told of wild fruit, like strawberries and cranberries, so thick it stained the wheels of their wagons. It's no wonder the fur trade barons were reluctant to extol the virtues of this place. Eyes were turning toward the Turtle Mountain region along the 49th parallel, where townships were being surveyed and the railroads would soon enter the picture. Lo and behold, on the shores of what was once Oak Lake, there sprang up a town with the luck of the Irish, Killarney. Come along with us. We'll tour this area in grand style, and we'll uncover a seldom told story in Canadian history, right here in southern Manitoba. It's a Manitoba morning. The prairie land rolls out to meet the horizon. Its bounty, the sustaining factor for the people who live here. This is a place where a good crop is celebrated. In Killarney, where town is a part of the country, honoring natural heritage is a presiding theme. In many a backyard or an artist's studio, there's evidence of this trend. Biology teacher Barry Denard.
Okay, I think that red-sided or eastern garter snakes are native to Manitoba and the Great Plains region, but they're very scarce in our part of the province.
I have a concern about students learning about their natural area, and so I've always felt that there's a need to bring animals into the classroom. I find, unfortunately, that over the past 2 decades, parents are spending less time with their children out in the country, and even farm children are becoming divorced from their natural heritage, their natural environment. That's my main thrust. Let children experience animals firsthand.
Owls live longer than most birds. They usually live at least 10 years.
Barry's partner in marriage, also a teacher, Judy Denard, is similarly a partner in ideals.
Because I grew up here, I know where to find all the best places. And if I want to take my class out anywhere, I know exactly where to go. Because it is a small town, and we can walk 10 minutes any direction and be in the country from the school. So it's quite easy just to teach them about everyday things. And I like to show the kids what they can see just by looking.
And by looking just down the road to the village of Homefield, you'll find the Harrison Milling and Grain Company. Standing for a century, the place for Bill Harrison is a living inheritance.
It's a spring wheat mill We mill spring wheat, we make a white flour, and we make bran, we make shorts. There's a real appeal to people to come to the mill. They're interested to see a miller. Most people have never met a miller. Most people have never seen a mill. They're interested in a miller that actually eats his own flour. And the flour we sell mostly locally, and when I say locally, it's anywhere within 150 miles. We even have some people from the southern states. I have an elderly doctor that comes up every year in his Cadillac and takes home half a dozen bags to California every year.
Catch him on a good day, and Jack Smith will fill you in on his collection of 1929 Hudsons, and then some.
It stems from when I was young. I guess I worked for a fellow that owned one, and I appreciated because of being trying to be a mechanic, and it was just a love of the car, plus the fact that it was a performing automobile. Not many cars in 1929 came out that you could do what you can do with these.
The surveying of the 49th parallel, the Canada-U.S. boundary, is to Killarney as history is to Felix Keene.
I grew up half a mile from the trail, and like many people in this community, I had members of my family and take me out to my dad's pasture and say, this is the Boundary Commission Trail. Those are the ruts. We'd walk over a little bit farther into the pasture, off the trail, and there was a buffalo rubbing stone where there was a large granite boulder, polished so smooth that the sun would reflect off it. And so that indicated to us, not only had the settlers come along here and all these other early white people, but the buffalo obviously had gone back and forth along this trail for thousands of years, maybe for no other reason than they were looking for a place to rub off their winter hair. So it was a very, very personal thing.
Incorporated as a town in 1906, Killarney today, population 2,500, is a service and shipping center for area farmers. Just 20 kilometers from North Dakota, an anomaly in the prairie landscape which straddles the boundary, the Turtle Mountains, tell of the beginnings of non-native settlement in what was once a part of the Hudson Bay Company's Rupert's Land.
In the 1840s and 50s, the Turtle Mountains were one of the few areas of this part of the country where there was any wood. There were a lot of fur-bearing animals, so it was obviously an important fur area, fur-producing area, but it was also an area where there was a tremendous amount of buffalo. By that time, there was not that many Indians left here, but there was expeditions coming out from the Red River to hunt buffalo here.
As a source of high-protein pemmican, the buffalo fueled the fur trade until finally, within a few years of Confederation, they were hunted into virtual extinction. Embracing the balance of nature is important to the people who live the land.
This area is right on the northern edge of the Great Plains, and it's actually a transition zone called the Aspen Parkland. So it's very ecologically very diverse, and we get animals and birds of all sorts that overflow from these areas. However, the impact of agriculture on the area since the 1880s when it was settled has been considerable. Birds that were common in the 1880s have vanished and other birds have replaced them. Things like meadowlarks and robins have benefited from this habitat destruction. So have white-tailed deer.
This is a short-eared owl. It was found out about 30 miles west of here. And this owl was brought in with a broken wing. Now you can see it. A number of years ago at the school, we set up a club for kids who were interested in looking after the animal collection that we had at the school. Many of the kids were kids that weren't allowed to have pets at home. And they had a real empathy for animals. So we had to do something. Right now we have a beautiful little short-eared owl. He had a very severely broken humerus. It was pinned by a veterinarian in the Pembina Valley. It pulled it out. It was still set. We had it x-rayed again. So we just bound it up and hope that it will eventually heal without the pin. And our whole idea is to put them back into wild, not to keep them for pets.
As restoring natural habitat will encourage the regeneration of species, safekeeping built heritage can help record the evolution of a society. Built heritage, like the mill, started by Bill Harrison's family.
They actually started in 1878 and in the Turtle Mountains, and eventually gravitated to the village of Homefield here and built the present mill that you're visiting today in 1898. This particular mill was originally powered by steam and is by hydro now. We have our own machine shop here. We have to make all our parts for the machinery because this is original equipment from 1898. We also have a good set of woodworking tools because we have wooden spout work, and a lot of the machinery has wooden cabinets on it and one thing and another. There was a pride in craftsmanship, I think, in those days, which has certainly stood us well in terms of the machinery that we have.
The summer of 1872. The need to define the Canada-U.S. border to cap an American expansionary mood following the Civil War was never more apparent. Agreed that the 49th parallel from the Lake of the Woods to the Rocky Mountains would bracket the two nations, the motherland instigated the survey.
There was about 300 commissioners appointed, most of them British Army officers, to carry on this work for the British. The Americans were supposed to do half the work. They grudgingly gave only $50,000 a year, approximately a third of what Great Britain was putting in. And they stipulated that it was American Army officers had to do all this work at no extra pay. To do this, they had to build a road from the Red River to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And this road became known as the International Boundary Commission Road, or shortly afterwards as the Boundary Commission Trail. And it was basically the supply line by which all the supplies and all the men were moved from the Red River to all points west, and then whatever had to be taken back, all points east. Because the Americans were so short of funds, they had no wherewithal to build this supply route. The British did. It was built almost entirely on the Canadian side of the 49th parallel, so that both the British Commission and the American Commission worked from the north south to the boundary.
The Boundary Commission Trail, coupled to the formation of the Northwest Mounted Police, would ultimately write the chapter on the settling of Western Canada.
In towns like this, right across Canada, there are always people who care when they see a bird hit by a car or find a baby bird that's apparently been abandoned. My wife has considerable skill and intuition about how to deal with them, and we began mending wings and feeding orphans and things of that sort.
The red-tailed hawk is a pretty vicious bird. He'll jump right at you. When we go in there, we have to wear gloves and actually a parka, so that if he claws you, it won't go through. He came to us with a wing that was broken. So right now he's okay, his wing is healed, but he has to do some physiotherapy to get flying. They let you know they want to be free, because as soon as they're able to fly, they fly. It's just a really good feeling that you get when you let them go. You think you've really helped something.
The 49th parallel. The 3-year adventure to define it left the legacy of the longest undefended border in the world.
The 49th parallel was determined astronomically by the position of a number of stars, quite a number of stars. So what had to be done was every 20 miles they had to set up a mini observatory. And if the nights were clear and the weather was favorable, in 5 or 6 days of observing the stars, you could determine how far north or south of the 49th parallel that observatory was. So the Americans would set up an observatory 20 miles farther west. The British would set up one. They would determine where the 49th parallel was. When they each of them had designated exactly where it was, either north or south of the observatory, then the crews cut a line in between the 2 points, surveyed it, and put in markers.
A chronicle of time in the Borderlands.
I just was down to Sacramento, Harvey. Every year our National Hudson Club has a meeting, and this year it happened to be Sacramento, so I went to Sacramento, and I just finished driving this.
And you drove that all the way?
I drove it all the way, 4,700 miles exactly, pretty well right to the mile.
Is there anybody else collecting 29s?
Oh, we have a vast number of club members collecting 29s, but nobody has an extensive collection. I have 5 29 Hudsons. We've got 4 on display here. It's the largest collection of 29 Hudsons finished. That is completely finished and running in the world. And the one I'm leaning against is a standard Hudson 4-door sedan. The one you're leaning on is a 29 Hudson all the way, but it has a custom body. This gray one and the other one over there are quite rare.
What kind of condition would this car have been in when you got it?
This car was actually so rough a shape and so bad a shape that it should have been left where it was purchased. The engine was wore out and the transmission was full of gravel. So all those pieces had to be thrown away and replaced with parts that I have gathered up over the years.
Well, it's a situation, you know, really where we inherited this particular operation, and you know, I couldn't sell it. The only way to preserve it is to use it a certain amount each year. As long as I go ahead and do 30 or 40 days milling with it a year, I have to keep that machinery in shape. I have to keep the building upright, and so it serves a purpose to preserve it. We are historically minded in the thing, and that's an important part of it.
The Turtle Mountains. Buying up surplus goods from the Boundary Commission for an outpost there in 1874, a fur trader, Bernard Lariviere, became the first permanent settler. Soon after, the hand of a preacher would secure a place on the map for a settlement on nearby Oak Lake.
A man by the name of L.O. Armstrong. He was the minister of the Church of England in Emerson, Manitoba. According to his opinion, there were too few Church of England people living in southern Manitoba. And in the early part of 1880, he made a tour across southern Manitoba, going along the Boundary Commission Trail to the Turtle Mountains. And it was his intention to scout out the land for settlement for these Church of England people. And it was also his intention to see where a railway could be built.
The Manitoba Southwestern Colonization Railway, prompted by Armstrong, would eventually be taken over by Canadian Pacific. The arrival of the line at Oak Lake in 1885, tied to Armstrong's promotion of the region, especially in Great Britain, opened the gates to land guides, agents, and settlers.
In 1880, a man by the name of Mr. O'Brien became a land guide. And he brought people into this area. He said that this area reminded him of Killarney Lake in Ireland, where he came from. And so he rechristened the locality, or the lake, Killarney. And so when the railroad came through, then the town site became known as Killarney.
Killarney. Springing up in the frontier of what has been called the first Trans-Canada Highway, the Boundary Commission Trail, the town is today a setting where a caring for the balance of the natural is perpetuated.
Rock-billed magpies are native to North America. Magpies, in fact, have lived for 5,000 years in this area. I'm optimistic. Wildlife can recover. Land can come back, and can do so amazingly quickly, as long as we have a generation of people coming up who want to assume stewardship. And I think that we have that in our youth.
Town as a part of country, and the process of awareness. In backyards, or in a carver's studio, like Paul Vigfussen's, there is evidence all around. Because here, preserving heritage, natural or man-made, means a loyalty to those who built the foundations, and a commitment to those who will carry the torch.
I've spent all my life here, you know, as a young person down here, right from the time I was 5 years old, and so milling for me is kind of second nature at this stage in the game. In the fourth generation, I have 3 daughters at my place, and they're all interested in the mill. And I've taught them the flow sheet in the mill, which is quite complicated. So that has been, you know, a real plus for the family, and it certainly is a help to me to have my wife and children here, you know, helping me out with that.
And as I was walking to school with my son a little while ago, he said, "Gosh, Dad, I wish I could have lived out in the country like you did when you were a boy." And so there's the dimension that you can enrich your children's lives by sharing some of your own experiences and sharing some of the experiences of people that have told you about their experiences. So it's part in the past, and the other dimension, it's in the future with the people that are around you and coming after you.
This is a really ideal place, I think, for me to live. Wildlife gives me, it's kind of my religion. I get a spiritual feeling out of being out in the wild. Just being out in the trees, hearing the wind blow, seeing the birds flying, I just can relax and be myself.
A lot of old guys, you know, like you and me, like the sporty cars, and I love that coupe with the rumble seat.
I think the coupe is sporty. They made quite a few coupes. There's not too many left around.
I think we ought to go to California. I want to go in the coupe, and I want to sit in the rumble seat. How about that?
Oh, that's fine. After California.
Not a bad idea.
No.